Well, I was going to start out by introducing myself, but I guess Lizzie just did that. So, hi, everybody.
Hi.
So, I'd love to get a sense of what backgrounds you guys are coming from. Like, who here plays Secrets and Powers, or knows what that means? Okay. Who here plays Nordic? Who here plays Boffer? Okay. Who here does Freeform? Who here protests this list of terms and does something else? Okay. What are some of those things?
We do something, we run a summer camp that is a hybrid of a lot of those things.
All right, summer camp experience. Anybody else protest the terms and do something different?
White Wolf campaign one.
Okay, great. Right, campaigns. I totally forgot campaigns. Who does campaigns? All right, cool. Any other protesters? Yeah.
I create and run Indigenous Lunch.
Oh, wonderful. Oh, cool. Dude, you should be up here. All right, I will be up here, and then I will listen with rapid interest. Cool. So I'm going to talk about emotional immersion. So I'm going to start out by qualifying that I am not a Larp scholar, and I'm not here to get into the clusterfuck of defining which games are which games. So instead, I will talk about some games that I like running and playing, and how this element can fit into a few different styles. And then I will let the bloodbath happen somewhere else.
All right.
So with that in mind, yeah. So I'm going to start out with a couple stories. One will be kind of funny and one will be more serious. And then we're going to spend most of our time defining some technical terms, because I think that nouns are great. So a number of years ago, I wrote a game called Argentine. And in it, you play the minions of an evil wizard after the wizard is defeated by the good guys. And you as minions, you're all like locked in jail by the heroes. This is the falling action of the fantasy series. And you're going to be like executed for being evil minions. And you don't really matter to the heroes. And it was 4 to 8 characters stuck in a room for 3 to 4 hours. And the majority of the characters were just going to die. Like, there were a couple ways where you could get out and 1 or 2 people could get out, but for the most part the game was about like exploring your relationships and your self-concept without your evil master, and you're gonna die. So this wasn't a game about political commentary, as other similar games have been. This also wasn't a game about the nature and dynamics of power. It wasn't editorial. It was actually just, I wrote this because I was like, I think it'd be really fun to sit in a room for like 3 hours and contemplate death. So it was meant to be a really like internal, like sometimes you just want to do that experience. And surprisingly, it kind of worked. So like I had this experience the first couple times running it, where people would sit in this jail cell and not look at each other and not do anything for like 5 or 10 minutes at a time. And the first time this happened to me, I was sitting there and I'm like, oh my god, I've done something really wrong. Like, this game is so boring. Nobody is saying anything to anyone. Like, they're just sitting there. It's like a third of the way through and it's over. So I was like, okay, you know what? I'm going to go in OC, out of character. Everybody know OC? Okay. And, you know, I'm going to like figure out where everyone is and try to come up with some emergency plot to fix this. So finally, like after 5 minutes, I go in and I like go up to the first person. I sneak up to them. They're like sitting on a bale of hay, you know, occasionally gazing at the door, occasionally gazing at the chamber pot, occasionally gazing at someone's back. And I'm like, hey, you know, how are you doing? Are you okay? And the reaction was, stop talking to me. And I was like, okay, but I just want to make sure, like, do you have enough to do? They're like, yeah, I'm role-playing, I'm busy. Stop talking to me. Okay, that's fine, I guess. So I go up to the next person, like, hey, how are you doing? They're like, no, wait, I'm totally great. I'm thinking some things through. Stop talking to me, go away. And I'm like, all right, you guys, you seem to be having fun, so I'm just gonna leave you guys alone. And I think my record for that game was 10 solid minutes of all of the players not doing anything. But they were doing something. They were all having a really intense emotional role-playing experience in their head. And that was when I kind of realized that like that's actually exactly what I was going for. Right? There wasn't dramatic external plot, there was no fighting, there was no romance, but there was a lot of intense internal plot. And if there's one thing that I want everyone to take out of this talk, it's the thing that I really want to advocate for is the separation of the emotional experience from the performative drama. I think a lot of times when we talk about serious gaming or intense gaming, what comes to mind is theater. What comes to mind is, very narrative-driven gaming, and this could be the case. But for me, emotional immersion is really about the thread of the inner emotional journey. It's not necessarily about something that is visible on the outside. In this case, I literally had to tamp down all of my Jamly instincts and be like, I'm just going to sit here and be bored until they're ready to make a plot. And it was fun, So I had a second story, but it sounds like I am talking way longer than I thought I was going to be talking. So we're going to skip it, but if you want to hear a serious story, come talk to me. So in order to talk about how do you go and design for that sort of inner experience? And I want to define a term that I think we often overlook, which is when we go and embody a character, what is the thing that we are holding on to consider ourselves to be successfully embodying the character in the fiction? Right? Given that we are not actually becoming someone else, that there's a layer of fiction and a layer of reality, what is the root of the fiction that we hold on to? And the term that I use for this is the root. So some common roots that we typically use in design is entanglements or situations. I'm the queen, I'm the investigator assigned to do this, right? Their goals, I apologize by the way, I think the formatting failed to line up. I'm here to find love, I'm here to, win the MacGuffin. There's something like style, I'm here to explore what it's like to be an anarchist in the 1800s. I don't know what that's like, but that's what you have to explore. And then there's something like beliefs, I'm here because I'm opposed to that, right? And what happens is that when you actually create a game from a designer's point of view, you have a list of your characters, right? And then your characters, what are the blobs that you consider to be the characters that are moving around? So I don't know if a lot of you here do diagrammatic game design, but if you do that and you're this is a character, there's a line between these two people, what does that spot mean? For me, this is the root. And in emotional immersion, the root is what is the core emotional experience. And what that means is that, so if you take a game like a style like Secrets and Powers, entanglements and goals are typically going to be your root. If you take something like Ghost Court, style is typically your root. But it's what is everybody doing together and what's everyone on the same page about? And when your root is emotional experience, what that really means is that as a player, I know that as long as I'm following this thread of emotional experience, for example, this unease with a slight frustration and a slight resentment, but a sense of guilt, and I'm not sure what's really going on, and I'm ready to lash out and stab someone next to me, or maybe I'm going to throw myself off the cliff. I don't know. That is my root, and the journey of that becomes the journey of the game. Which means, another way to look at this is that the root is the thing that as long as you stay in that, it does not break the game. So keeping that in mind, I'm going to just define emotional immersion. So emotional immersion is a design style, independent of game format, that prioritizes as a top priority of player experience, having an intense, nuanced, dynamic, and continuous thread of emotional experience. So to dive in on each of these words, intense means that it's really about having it. And this is important because quite often emotional immersion is over the top. It's unrealistic. If you look at Hunger Games is a great example of an immersion story because it's oh my god, I have strong feelings about politics, I have strong feelings about my love life, I have strong feelings about these people trying to murder me, and the entire thread of what's going on in my entire political reality is based on my ability to contain my love for this dude. So the universe revolves around your emotions, and it's intense, and it's also a drastically unrealistic setup. But you don't worry about that because it's about being able to be dramatic, right? Nuanced is also important. You have to be able to gradually evolve. It's really the space you're playing in. Dynamic is important because it has to be able to change over time. It's not oh hey, here you're playing the angry person, you're just going to be angry the whole game. Have fun with that. And then lastly, continuous is the one where it actually disagrees most often with other genres because it's not about, oh, I have an opportunity while I'm on stage in this scene have this emotion, so I will, and then I'll go do some other stuff, and then I'll come back and like have a different emotion. It's actually the full continual thread. So it's exactly if you were playing a strategic game, the state of your ability to achieve your goals is all of these. And in this case, it's your ability to have an emotional experience. So as a note that I've kind of touched upon, we distinguish the priority of this type of experience over narrative, over performance, or over strategy. So I'm going to say again, it's not the same as telling a great story. Actually, the second story was about how it wasn't the same as telling a great story, but I'll skip it. So the idea is like, it may not look like a plot on the outside. It may not look like anything that's going on the outside. But often when we are collaborating, especially in theatrical games, we'll be like, okay, now here's the time where I hand the screen to someone else, and now here's the time I do the dramatic thing, and then we feel done. But emotional experience, you're actually simulating your internal world. And then it's also not the same as performance or role-playing or stylistic role-playing, and it's also not the same as competitive strategy. Now, it can actually have components of all of these, and most games will have components of all of these, including emotional immersion. The thing I really want to distinguish is emotional immersive games do this as its main goal. And in order to do this, we really need to have a setting that pushes back on us. It's actually not dissimilar to kink in that you want to be in an environment in which you only have a limited number of options so that you can have really strong feelings about your options. If you have the ability to be really dynamic and be like, oh, let me make up that now I'm in this situation. Oh, let me make up that like now these are the rules. Then you don't have as deep an immersive sense of pushing against the world, and that's a critical part of the experience. So I'm going to make a distinction between two types of design. One is logic deep, and one is logic dynamic. So logic deep game has deep simulated rules of the world. It doesn't have to be system. It could be just like principles of reality, like, like in Lost. If I go around, then in Lost, like relationships are about demanding whether you trust people. I don't know how many people watch Lost, right? But like, it's not actually about building a foundation of trust. It's like, do you like my personality? Do you trust me? Come do this crazy thing I'm asking you to do for no reason, right? Like that's a kind of deep principle that's just how the world works, right? So it's okay to have deep principles in the world, but the distinction is that if you are playing something like Fate, or if you're playing something very improvisational or theatric, then typically people are going to be layering things on top of each other. And so there's kind of a trade-off in this, right? And logic deep games allow for really immersive loss of control experiences. Logic dynamic games allow for much more creative collaboration. I actually, as a side note, have a thing where I kind of believe that by default, the way most logic dynamic games are done commonly privileges neurotypical people, because when you're really improvising a lot of real-time, ideas that are simple to understand and that are common are more easily received. So I actually think that exploring different psychological and neurological experiences is something that logic deep games allows, and a lot of the people I know who are into emotional immersion are also narrators. So really quickly, we use the term an artifact of fiction to be a rule of the setting for no good reason. It's essentially, things work this way and we're going to ignore it. Right, so in a typical Secrets and Powers game, it works because no one is going to leave this room, even if your life is in danger. Like, no, really, you're going to stay in this room. So we're just not going to question that. Right, there we go. In Lost, there's this rule that two traveling groups traveling anywhere across this giant island will always bump into each other. And you just don't question why you managed to bump into each other, you just run with it. In Ghost Court, you have this principle that like legal procedure is color, right? Nobody's going to care if the judge follows one rule here and another rule here, because that's not what it's about. So a couple, at the bottom I'm using the emotional immersion examples. So in a couple games that I've written, in Mermaid, there's a rule that it's capturing people have a really hard time understanding each other. So if someone says something and you don't understand what they said, you're not allowed to ask for clarification, you must feel alienated.
Awesome.
In another game I have, the Evercourt, you are not allowed to ever build an actual political alliance or an alliance based on trust. You must do one-time exchanges of favors, and one guy has the special ability to make people trust each other. Okay, so what are some considerations we have when designing emotionally immersive games? One big one ends up being, can and should everyone be the protagonist? And this is actually really interesting. I'm going to come back to kink for a moment. So I don't know if you guys are involved in kink communities, but the ones that I'm familiar with, there's a common problem that there are never enough tops. And this happens a lot because if you're this happens a lot for EI because if you're playing a game that's about responding to situations, then who is creating the situations for you? Right? The structure of the game creates situations somewhat. If you're locked in a room, you're all going to die, that's a situation, you're helpless, you're responding to it, it's great. Right? But once you're actually talking about on the interactive level, you need some people who are constantly, dynamically, and continuously creating problems for each other. So how do you do this while remaining reactive? And there are a couple of interesting possible solutions to this that I've played with, but these are really more in the considerations list because they're open discussions for me. One is that you just take turns and you have games in which not everyone is the emotional immersion person. And Ben Lehman, who does a lot of emotional immersion design for tabletop, advocates this format heavily. He has people rotate being the character that is under focus and the people playing the environment. Another option is having, which is the one I really favor, is teaching people to develop players to develop the skill of creating emotional plot for each other while still having plot themselves in a way that is not dissimilar to the share the camera principle in more standard Larp. Which is to say, if we're being really emotional, we typically create problems for people. We fight, we argue, we criticize people, and really just letting go of our inhibitions against being mean to each other. And playing a game in which we take out our feelings by being cruel, and kind of creating plot for each other that way. So Mermaid is a game that tries to encourage doing that. I've run into a number of times people have a really, really hard time being mean to each other. So I might have a different solution, but mathematically it works. Another related one is there single shared climax if most plot is internal rather than external, right? In one of the runs of Caldera Game Fires at MC, we had people come into their internal story climax at drastically different times. Do you add some sort of external ritualistic component or external plot component to force a group climax? And if that happens, to what extent are you then externalizing plot instead of internalizing plot? How do we share what happened? If we're spending 10 minutes sitting in a room in our own heads, how do you actually verbally describe that? I actually come from a background of I have a head injury, I have a bunch of mental things and mental health challenges. And for those of you who have also had that, it's not easy to describe it in a coherent story afterwards to people what happened. You sure feel like you had an adventure, right? But outside it looks like you were lying in bed for a while and then you yelled at some people and maybe you did a little work and then went back to bed. It's okay, but I'm no, you don't understand. I had a really intense day, guys. So how do we ever actually share those stories with other people often, all right? And I'm going to have more last one. If you're curious about playing yourself in lots of Bleed, you can come talk to me about that too. But in conclusion, Emily is telling me I have no time. So come talk to me about emotional immersion, or, don't. But I hope that we all can separate out this notion of intense, serious inner journey from performative theater.